Anonymous functions, or closures, can be verbose in their syntax and therefore hard to read. But that changes in PHP 7.4 with the new implementation of arrow functions, or short closures. First, let's look at an example of code without the new arrow functions. This anonymous function will take the square of a number. You see that we have the variable square, gets, and then our anonymous function. It's got the full keyword function, a parameter we're passing it, the curly braces, an explicit return statement, and then the semicolon at the end. If we execute this code, you'll see that we can pass an argument to our variable and 16 is printed out. But with arrow functions, we can shorten this up quite a bit. Let's rewrite it. We can say square gets fn instead of the full keyword function, num, and then instead of the curly braces, we'll use the arrow function, num times num, and then the semicolon. So now let's move our echo statement below our new anonymous function. But we'll get the same results in one line. It's less text and it's a lot cleaner. But this gets better if you want to use a variable from the parent scope. So let's look at another example. Here we have an anonymous function that we want to use the factor variable from the parent scope in. This anonymous function will simply multiply whatever number we pass to it by the factor. So we have our full anonymous function here, but in order to get factor inside the anonymous function, we have to get the keyword use. So again, this is a pretty verbose function, and then we can echo it the same way. With the arrow functions, we can rewrite it much more cleanly. So we could say multiply gets fn num our arrow function num times factor. So before we echo that, let's comment out our first statement, and then we'll echo, and we get 20. Again, we have much cleaner code here. In our final example, let's take a look at something like array map, which this could be especially useful for. Let's say we want to take an array of numbers and put the squares into the new array. We'd need to write a square function and pass that as the first parameter in array map, or use the much more verbose closure syntax. But with arrow functions, we can do that all on one line cleanly. Let's start with an array of numbers. We'll say array 1, 2, 3. And then we'll create our short closure. So we'll call this squares. Gets, we'll use the function array map. And then inside of array map, we can write our short closure. Fn num gets num times num. And then our second argument will be our numbers array. So you could see that this single anonymous function using the short closures is the first argument, and the second argument is our numbers array. Now if we print that out using print r, you'll see that we have an array of squares here, 1, 4, and 9. But we did it in a single line that is very readable. So there are a couple of points to note about how arrow functions work. And the first is that they can only have one expression, a return statement. There's no return keyword allowed either, so don't use that, it's implied. So if you need a multiple expression statement, it's best to keep that in a separate function. However, they do support type hinting and the spread operator, which means that you could come up with some pretty complex single-line statements without a bunch of syntax. This is another step that PHP is taking to make the code more readable, and it's a big one. Your anonymous functions will use less boilerplate code and be more concise.